Chapter 19. Still, knowing nothing for certain but the need for extreme secrecy, the blind man suffered himself to be pulled and dragged down until he felt the stone of the church at his back and heard Smith's voice breathe close in his ear. "He's there, by the statue, Pegtop, old Hoppin, Scrape, Whispering Jack, Jacko the Alley, Little Jackie Field, and the spitting image of his done-for pa. It was Mr. Black." The son? Alive? Yes, more's the pity. It was him what done the old man in. Little, limping, whispering Jack. Horrible, horrible. He's not of your opinion, for he's a smiling there. He's a thoughtful of disposition, he is. Country bred. Who'd have thought the devil was born among the green fields out Barnet way? He's a smiling, very thoughtful. You got no eyes, friend, and you should be thankful, for you ain't missing much. So now they knew, beyond all doubt, what discovery the old man had made and sought to take with him to the grave. He had discovered his son was still alive, and would have been better dead. That the hope, the dream, the golden place in his life was as wicked and monstrous a morsel of a man, and would as stalked and whispered and hid anywhere in the world. To this dreadful thing the document had at last led Smith and Mr. Mansfield, to this one-legged gentleman, squatting in the shadow of a carved angel's wing, smiling brutally with the air of having come by appointment. Fearfully, Smith's mind went back to his one-time hopes that the document would raise him up in the world. Instead, it had given him a sight of depths past even his darkest dreams. But the one-legged gentleman was looking up. Someone was coming, keeping the appointment. Who'd arranged to meet with the devil? "Here he comes," breathed Smith with bitter triumph. "Your friend and mine." For into the courtyard, skipping across the snow with his black coat-tails flapping, like a prosperous bird of prey, came the neat Mr. Billing. "Jack," he called gently. "Billing!" Mr. Mansfield stiffened as if to rise. Grimly, Smith held him back. He would have the magistrate hear all that was to be heard. "The document, have you got it?" This from Mr. Billing, who was come to Mr. Black's side. "No, our brown friends are not yet come." "Ah, well, it won't be long now, dear Jack." Mr. Billing laid his hand round the other's shoulder. The one-legged man seemed to shiver slightly, as if submitting that with an ill grace. "As you say, not long, dear Billing, and we'll be rid of each other." "Why, Jack, we're friends. Have been for years. Why the bitterness now?" "You made me kill him, Billing." "I made you? Jack, it's not so. You planned, you urged, you tempted." "Ah, but you acted, Jack. Never forget that." "How can I? Not till I die, and maybe not even then." He looked up at the Black Angel and then back to the attorney with a harsh groan. "And do you remember, you even swore it would be Andrews coming." "A murder's a murder, Jack, no matter who perishes. But don't blame yourself, dear. It's not you or me, it's the world we live in, Jack. What can we do? We've got to live. Take the rough with the smooth, Jack. It'll all come out in the wash. If there's a God in heaven, he knows the difficulties we're up against down here. He'll understand. He'll forgive us. And if there's no such judge, Jack, what have we got to lose? It's all in the mind, my dear." Well, we'd all like to be saints through and through, nothing nicer, but we can't. It's the world, Jack, not us, and we can't change that. No, sir. In the quiet, cold air, the voices carried intimately, so as no inflection even was lost on the listeners. It was not Mr. Black then, but Mr. Billing who was the devil. Mr. Black was but the outward image of evil, its eyes, teeth, hands, skin, and hair, but Mr. Billing was its inward, horrible, cajoling, obliging soul. They continued murmuring in a like vein for a while longer, and it became plain it was not for the first time. There was a weariness in Mr. Black's bitterness and a boredom in the attorney's evasions that bespoke much repetition. Over and above them, the Black Angel brooded thoughtfully, and somewhere beneath them lay whatever it was they'd murdered for, the buried trifle. But now a slight breeze sprang up, lifting little tufts of snow from the stones as if there was a restlessness below, a stirring. "Oh God, for judgment," groaned Mr. Mansfield. "But what sort of judgment can there be? At last, exclaimed the terrible Mr. Black. "They've come." And yet more terrible, Mr. Billings smiled and waved. From the far end of the churchyard, through the quiet yews, came the two men in brown. Very dark-faced and frozen they were, as they approached their employers. But the breeze quickened and their exchanges were partly lost. The document? Not got it. Not? Why not? Not killed the blind man then? They shook their wicked heads. Mr. Black, grey with terror and rage, raised his hand to strike at them, but Mr. Billing, everyone's friend, stayed his hand and did not free it. Instead, he forced it down and made it point. Would Mr. Billing have used even his own finger? Not if another was to hand to the snow. What was so remarkable about the snow? Footmarks. There were his own. There, so curious that they'd chilled Smith's blood when he'd first spied them, were the one-legged man's, and 2 sets more, not to be accounted for, leading through the gate. Through the gate, close by the church wall, to a certain old tree. "They've found us," whispered Smith. "We ain't got a chance, Mr. Mansfield. Judgment's come all right, but it's come for us." Slowly the two men in brown turned to peer at the tree. Then a single grin spread upon their faces. They began to walk. The breeze grew into a wind, and the snow about their feet shuddered and shifted as if was creeping turmoil below. "Kill them!" screamed Mr. Billing abruptly. "No help for it. You've got to do it." Could Smith have escaped? In all certainty, yes. He'd the agility, the quickness, the wit, and the terror to vanish from the abominable churchyard before the men had covered half the distance, but not so Mr. Mansfield. The old mole in the hole could never have got further than the gate without a sharp knife in his broad back. So Smith, with all his quickness, wit, and terror, lacked the last ingredient for flight, the will. He was not capable of leaving the blind man behind. "They're a-coming, Mr. Mansfield." "Then for goodness sake, go!" "For goodness sake, that's a queer thing." The men were now very close. They carried short, glittering knives. Already they could see Smith, and they were grinning widely, even encouragingly at him. Now Smith, in spite of all his knowledge of the worst of the town, its rogues and vagrants, its thieves and slinking byways, was really no more than a child, and he turned to childish weapons for his last defence. With small, trembling fingers, he made a snowball, stood up with a loud, defiant shriek, flung it at the nearer of the advancing pair. The men swore, but stopped. His companion, instead of dispatching the boy, laughed. A very costly laugh. The seconds thus spent were important. Momentarily, the wind puffed up a little storm of snow, and out of it, as if resurrected from under the white ground itself, staggered a formidable figure. "Stop! Hold! Stand there!" Cloaked, large-pistoled, stood Lord Tom. You dirty great bag of wind, be off with you," snarled the man with snow in his face. "Spare the boy, I'll not have him harmed." "You'll not? And who's you, Lord Piddling Tom? Be off, or we'll slit you into tiny pieces, friend." Lord Tom's frostily bristling face grew pitifully angry. "Smart!" he called, waving vaguely. "Never fear, Lord Tom's beside you. I'll save you, lad. I'll blow blue daylight through them." "Be off, Lord Tom," answered Smith bitterly. "You'd best save your own lousy skin. I'm done with you now. I know you, Lord Tom, and I don't like what I know." The huge highwayman flinched. He screwed up his eyes. Whether or not he really loved the boy was hard to say. Maybe he did. Maybe the sharp wound he just received was all but mortal. And so, maybe from this moment on, he was fighting for more than his life. He was fighting for his soul. "Back! Back!" shouted Lord Tom with the utmost valour and rage. "And if we don't," sneered the two men, "then you're as dead as mutton." For a second time, the smaller of the two men in brown laughed. He steadied his knife, took a pace forward. "Blue daylight!" roared Lord Tom, and fired. A terrible double roar, a terrible double shout, and the man who laughed no more. He was dead. And Lord Tom, much astonished, was capering foolishly in the snow, opening and shutting his mouth in defiant shouts that emerged as silent puffs of scarlet air. There was a ball inside of him. Mr. Black had shot him, even as he discharged his own pistol. Lord Tom was as good as dead, but he seemed not to know it yet. Instead, with the meagre remains of his life, he threatened the second of the two men with a pistol that was suddenly grown marvellously heavy. And this second fellow, seeing his companion dead, waited no longer. Wildly he rushed away. Lord Tom's dance grew slower and comically clumsy as he strove to lift his great boots out of the clinging snow. Even as the mazed and suddenly heartbroken Smith watched, all the fire and fury and daring rage drained out of his old hero's face. He halted, tottering, then sank upon his knees, curiously crossing his pistols upon his chest, where there was a warm, gushing pain. Ha ha! Blue daylight, eh, lad? They were alone in the graveyard now. Mr. Black had hopped crazily in the wake of his adviser and friend, Mr. Billing. They had heard sounds from the house and escaped. The shots had set up an alarm. The dogs were howling watchedly. Lord Tom lay with his head on the lowest of the steps where Mr. Black had sat and waited. Above him brooded the Stone Angel. If he knew he was done for, the sight must have frightened him, yet he showed none of it. Sadly, Miss Smith approached him, leading blind Mr. Mansfield. Glad to make your acquaintance, sir. Never thought to. Shake hands. Really an honour. And for me, Lord Tom, and for me. Solemnly, their hands, guided by Smith, met and grasped the dying highwayman's and the blind magistrate's, and both were glad of it, for both had reached the end of a journey. For Lord Tom it was the last, but for Mr. Mansfield it was maybe his first. A very strange journey, from justice to compassion. Now Lord Tom closed his eyes, and from out of his side a red patch blossomed in the snow, spread and gently melted into tiny scarlet needles and caves, then filled up. Knights on the common, Smut, he whispered. Duval, Turpin, Robinson, and Lord Tom, wept Smith, for his friend was dead. And so was Mr. Black. Andrews had followed him as he leapt and hopped away. He'd taken a fowling piece, caught him this side of Whetstone, and shot him dead. Mr. Black lay like a malformed dark star in the snow, a giant child's star with a wooden stick to hold it by, that shadowy, formidable ruin of a good man's son. What had been his history, as dark and shadowy as the rest of him? Where had he lived? How lost his leg? How met with his corrupt adviser? These were questions to which there were no answers. All that was known for certain was that he'd fled his home 12 years before and never dared return on account of some hanging offence. This Andrews knew of, and preferred that the world and Mr. Field should think Jack dead rather than damned. A heavy secret, and the granite old fellow's shoulders were bending under it. But to hide an evil is not to destroy it. The old man had made his discovery and had been hurried into his grave. Andrews must have stood a great while upon a hillock above the fallen figure, for when Mr. Leonard's coach came towards Prickler's Hill, he was still there, looking to the sky as if the shape below had fallen a great way to his cold white ruin. But of Mr. Billing there was no sign, and it seemed for a while as though the earth itself had swallowed him up. No one saw him, neither anyone in the house, nor Mr. Leonard coming from Barnet, nor Miss Mansfield coming afoot from Whetstone, where Mr. Billing, whom she'd insisted on accompanying, had begged her to remain, as if to spare her from the tragic news he was confident was awaiting, that her father had been murdered on Finchley Common. There was no doubt that this vile and hateful man still loved Miss Mansfield, for the sake of which spark of humanity in him, maybe his sentence in the courts of heaven will be to burn in hell for one day less than if he'd never loved at all.